On September 4, 1957, Ford Motor Company rolled out what they promised would be the car of the future. They called it the Edsel. 2 years and $350 million later, that's about $3.7 billion in today's money, it was dead. All because they forgot one tiny detail. People actually have to want to buy your car. At the time, Ford was unstoppable. They just watched General Motors dominate the mid-price market, and executives were convinced they were missing out on easy money. The plan was simple enough. Build a completely new brand, fill the gap between Ford and Mercury, and watch the profits roll in. They even hired poets and mythologists to name it, seriously. A poet named Mary Ann Moore suggested Utopian Turtle Top. They went with Edsel instead, named after Henry Ford's son. That should have been the first red flag. Behind the scenes, Ford spent 4 years and more money than most countries had building this thing. They launched the biggest marketing campaign in automotive history. Dealers were given special training. Commercials saturated every TV network. The hype was so intense that 2.5 million people visited showrooms on launch day, and then they actually saw the car. The Edsel had a front grille that looked like someone tried to design a toilet seat and gave up halfway through. One executive described it as an Oldsmobile sucking a lemon. The styling was so polarizing that people either loved it or thought it was hideous. Turns out hideous won by a landslide. But the real problem wasn't just the looks, it was everything else too. The build quality was a disaster. Cars rolled off the assembly line with oil leaks, faulty brakes, and push-button transmissions that didn't work. One dealer opened 15 Edsels fresh from the factory, and every single one needed repairs before it could be sold. Meanwhile, America was sliding into a recession, and suddenly nobody wanted to buy an expensive mid-price car that looked like a practical joke. Then, the economy hit. By October 1957, just 1 month after launch, the market for mid-price cars collapsed. Ford had bet everything on perfect timing and got the worst timing imaginable. It was like launching a luxury umbrella brand in the middle of a drought. Sales targets called for 200,000 units in the first year. They sold 64,000, and most of those buyers immediately regretted it. By 1959, Ford pulled the plug. The Edsel became shorthand for corporate failure so spectacular that business schools still teach it as a case study in hubris. But here's the thing. Ford at least tried something new. They failed big, but they learned from it. Now let's talk about a company that decided the best business decision was to stop making the one thing people actually loved. In 1981, John DeLorean, former General Motors golden boy turned independent car maker, launched the DMC-12. You know it better as the DeLorean, the silver car from Back to the Future. It had gull wing doors, a stainless steel body, and a dream that was too good to be true. Because it was. DeLorean raised $175 million mostly from investors and the British government, which was desperate to create jobs in Northern Ireland. The factory opened in Belfast in the middle of the Troubles because apparently building a futuristic sports car in a war zone seemed reasonable. The car was supposed to be revolutionary. It ended up being slow, unreliable, and wildly overpriced at $25,000, nearly double what a Corvette cost. But the real disaster wasn't the car, it was DeLorean himself. By 1982, the company was hemorrhaging cash. Sales were terrible. Quality control was a myth. And John DeLorean had a solution: cocaine. Not using it, selling it. In October 1982, he was caught in an FBI sting trying to move $24 million worth of cocaine to save his car company. His defense? Entrapment. He claimed the FBI pressured him into it. A jury somehow agreed and he walked. But the company didn't. The DeLorean Motor Company filed for bankruptcy in 1982 after producing just 9,000 cars. Most of them barely ran. The British government lost $77 million. Investors lost everything. And John DeLorean spent the rest of his life as a cautionary tale about hubris, desperation, and really bad decision-making. The car only became iconic because Back to the Future made it cool. Without that movie, it would have been forgotten as an expensive paperweight with doors that opened the wrong way. Meanwhile, over at General Motors in the late 90s, executives looked at their lineup and thought, you know what's missing? A crossover that looks like it was designed by committee in a fever dream. And thus, the Pontiac Aztek was born. At the time, GM was trying to appeal to younger buyers. The Aztek was supposed to be rugged, versatile, and adventurous, a vehicle for people who wanted to camp, surf, and mountain bike, all while looking like they drove a spaceship designed by someone who'd never seen a spaceship. The design team pitched it as bold and futuristic. The public called it the ugliest car ever made. The Aztek launched in 2001 with plastic body cladding, mismatched proportions, and a front end that looked like it was surprised to exist. GM predicted it would sell 75,000 units in the first year. They sold 11,000. Car journalists mocked it. Buyers avoided it. Even Breaking Bad, which featured an Aztek as Walter White's car, only used it because it symbolized a man who'd given up on life. But here's the twist. The Aztek wasn't actually a bad car. It was practical, reliable, and had features that crossovers today still use, like a cooler in the center console and a tent attachment for the rear. The problem was that it looked like someone melted a minivan and reassembled it in the dark. And in the car business, if people won't be seen driving it, it doesn't matter how good it is. By 2005, GM killed the Aztek after selling just 119,000 units total, over 5 years. Pontiac itself was dead by 2010, and the Aztek became a punchline. If GM had hired a designer who understood that cars need to look like cars and not abstract art projects, the Aztek might have been the crossover that saved Pontiac instead of the one that buried it. Then there's Tucker. Preston Tucker, to be exact. In 1948, he had a vision: build the safest, most innovative car in America. The Tucker 48, also called the Tucker Torpedo, had a rear-mounted engine, disc brakes, a padded dashboard, and a third headlight that turned with the steering wheel. It was genuinely ahead of its time. The problem? The big three automakers didn't want competition. Tucker raised $17 million and built a factory in Chicago. He sold dealership rights before a single car existed. He hyped the design in newspapers and newsreels. And then the Securities and Exchange Commission came knocking. They accused him of fraud, claiming he was just running a stock scam and never intended to build cars. The trial dragged on. His funding dried up, and by the time he was acquitted in 1950, it was too late. Tucker managed to build 51 cars total. That's it. Each one was a masterpiece of engineering that proved he wasn't a fraud. He was just too bold for an industry that hated change. Today, those 51 Tuckers are worth millions each. But Preston Tucker died broke in 1956, convinced the system destroyed him because he dared to innovate. And maybe he was right, because while Ford, GM, and Chrysler crushed Tucker for trying something different, they spent the next 50 years making the same boring sedans until Japanese automakers ate their lunch. By the time Detroit figured out that innovation mattered, Toyota and Honda had already won. Tucker's crime wasn't fraud, it was being too early. So what's the lesson here? The Edsel failed because Ford ignored what customers wanted. DeLorean failed because its founder thought cocaine was a valid business plan. The Aztek failed because GM designed a car that looked like a Rorschach test. And Tucker failed because he had the audacity to be good. If Ford had spent less time naming the Edsel and more time making sure it didn't leak oil, it might have survived the recession. If John DeLorean had stuck to building cars instead of trafficking drugs, maybe the DMC-12 would have gotten the refinement it needed. If GM had looked at the Aztek and said, maybe we should make this not look insane, Pontiac might still exist. And if the Big Three had let Tucker compete instead of crushing him, American cars might have stayed innovative instead of complacent. But they didn't. And that's why car history is littered with disasters that remind us of one simple truth. It doesn't matter how much money you spend, how bold your vision is, or how revolutionary your idea might be. If your car looks like a toilet, runs like a lemon, or gets you arrested for drug trafficking, it's probably not going to work out.